And this is something that a lot of times white liberals and black liberals, people who are just liberals, don't understand. So if dignity is the key, then you understand how abhorrent ICE raids are, and you
Yeah.
understand how abhorrent it is to mistreat people because they don't have a passport, they don't have papers, right?
Right.
And because of birthright citizenship, which goes back to the Civil War and Reconstruction, if not for the 14th Amendment, we would all need papers.
Welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy. Marcus, we refuse to be distracted here on the podcast, which is why this week I think we're talking about Trump's so-called golden age of affordability. Is that right? How's that going for you?
Oh, Nora, it's going great. Instead of buying eggs by the dozen, we now buy them at $1 a piece. So,
Fair.
so there's a lot less food waste going on. That's one silver lining. And and because the latte from Starbucks is now a cool $10, it made boycotting them so much easier this week. And also, let me make sure to mention that dumbass like beer cup or whatever that they were,
Oh,
folks were standing in line
is this
for
like the
hours.
Target cross marketing thing?
Yeah, it
They're
is.
like desperate to bring people into the halls of fascism.
Yeah, I'm a tell you,
Any
had
reason?
one beer cup, one cheaply produced beer cup at a time. I will tell you, I could not tell the difference. I was recently in the dollar store. This is a real story because that's what folks can afford in Seattle these days.
Uh-huh.
And
Facts.
I swear, it looked there was a cup there. It's no, by the way, the dollar store is no longer $1. It is $1.25, by the
Oh
way.
no, yeah, and everything's like variable prices there. You have to like ask what things
Yeah,
are. Yes,
what
it's
happened
very
to the
confusing.
integrity of the title of the store, right? I mean, anyway, but yeah, no, there was there was a cup that looked exactly like the freaking bear cup that folks were standing in line for hours for, in the middle of the night. But anyway, I digress. I digress.
I think I've so thoroughly cleansed my timeline of Starbucks references that like I have not even heard about the bear cup. So
that is that is for the best. I do have to
yeah,
say it was good to see our mayor elect, Katie Wilson, here in Seattle, out on the picket lines there with the Starbucks
totally.
workers. So
Yeah, already at work pissing off the billionaires. I think she made Jeff Bezos pretty mad this week too. So
yeah, I saw there was a very nasty op-ed that was in the Washington Post that he did
yes.
not author it, but let me tell you, I'm sure he had no disagreement with it, shall we say? Anyway, anyway.
Yeah. Well, despite Trump's attempts this week to convince us that we're living in a socialist utopia, it's been anything but, Marcus. The cost of everything, pretty much except the price of silence around the Epstein files, is pretty sky high these days.
I must say, and my God, Nora, you talk about Skinamax back in the day, like
Oh,
the
God.
stuff that was released in the Epstein emails this week was just like basically made the entire internet collectively go like TMI because my God.
Yes. Yes. And also, I mean, on a somewhat hilarious note, I saw some very funny comments about, well, no wonder these guys love ChatGPT so much. They cannot write a
I
normal sentence.
yeah, I gotta. I was honestly thinking about you. I was reading some of the emails just because of the lack of punctuation and then like these poorly worded emails, and some of them are to
Yeah.
like, these high level academics like folks like Larry Summers, who was the president of Harvard at one time
Yes.
before stepping down because he said that there were innate differences between
Yeah. Talk about a
men
guy
and
with a
women and
closet full of skeletons. Man, he said
my
so
God,
many bad things in
yeah.
his lifetime.
I
And now he's like, well, I'm just going to return to teaching. And it's like, bro, you should not be anywhere near teaching right now.
I don't want him anywhere near like anyone. Like from the just
No.
from the conversation about like he was trying to essentially like prey upon a mentee and asking Jeffrey Epstein for
Yeah.
advice on how to hook up with her, and it's
Yes.
like this, like, dude, that's just you're just a creep, man.
I know. I know. It's just so confirming that so many of the vibes that we've always had about these guys were 100% accurate. And
Yeah,
Larry Summers maybe actually deserves his own private island to just
I I I know one person who won't be stepping there, or two, I guess, on this
yeah.
podcast.
Mm.
That being said, as of this recording, this is late breaking news as we record. the House of Representatives voted to release the Epstein files, and they voted 427 to 1, Nora, to 1.
And like, who's the guy? And we know it's a
Yeah,
guy,
yeah.
right?
I would,
Like,
yeah. I mean, I,
who was that one vote?
I, I haven't double checked, but I think I'm sight unseen. I'm gonna go with yes. It was probably a
Oh,
guy.
God. I mean, what kind of excuse do you even have for that? To be the one person who's voting against that? Like, I'm sorry, I left my moral compass in my other suit
Oh my
jacket. Or,
God, yeah.
I mean, like, what kind of money is buying that vote? Ugh.
I apparently not enough. It's just if it's just the guy, the one guy. But I mean, I will say this, Nora. I mean, we have ample evidence throughout the years that some members of Congress barely know what day it is. So I'll say I'm convinced that the one no vote, if I want to be charitable, maybe the guy thought we were talking about Theo Epstein, the baseball exec who broke the Chicago Cubs curse back in the day.
Honestly, it's a reach, but it tracks. Let's hope for that, Marcus. There's always one guy in any vote who thinks he's voting to rename a post office.
That is true. That is damn true.
um, he probably heard Epstein and was like, "Oh yeah, big Cubs fan, huge baseball guy, total good American." Meanwhile, everyone else is on the internet trying to explain who the real Epstein is, and you definitely don't want to be defending him on C-SPAN.
No, not at all. I gotta. I mean, that's gonna. If I'm sure that person is going to be primaried, and like yeah. Good
I hope
luck.
it haunts
Good luck
him.
is all I can
Yeah.
say. That, that being said, Nora, as we do try to steer clear of hot takes on this podcast, and we fail a lot of the time, quite frankly. I got.
Mm-hmm.
I do have to ask you, like, in terms of like sort of big picture here, like, what do you think the takeaway is from this whole ordeal? Like, I think mine, quite frankly, is just the reaffirmation that there is the powerful in this society, and then there's everyone else, right? And unfortunately for
Yeah.
us, the powerful are as morally and emotionally bankrupt as we think that they are.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think maybe the silver lining in all of this is that like no one seems fooled by
No,
this,
no.
and no one seems to be holding much allegiance to many of these powerful people. Like I thought it was so funny how Republicans were like, "Well, we're going to drop the files on Clinton," and everyone was like, "Do it."
Right.
Fine.
They're like, they're like,
Please. um I mean, so I guess the good news is that very few of us are fooled by the behavior of powerful people anymore, but it really is shocking to see it come out this clearly and this across the board, just the grossness of not just the horrible illegal and like predatory things that were being done to young women, but just the way that these guys talk about politics and
right.
their influence over it, and
Well, and how they talk
the
about,
way that
I mean, I know that this is no surprise to you, obviously, but just how they talk about women. I mean, and it's,
ugh, yeah,
these are,
that too.
again, with not to harp on, Larry Summers, but I mean, this is somebody who served in both the Obama and, Clinton administrations, and, was supposed to have at least some veneer of enlightenment. And my God, it's,
Yeah.
this could be the dude, coming out of the, adult video store or something down here on Second Avenue or something, and it's like in a trench
Yes.
coat. I like, oh my God, like again, I mean, I think and I don't know why I'm so sort of appalled by that, but I think I'm appalled by it in the sense of this is somebody who had so much power over so many young people's lives, particularly when he was at Harvard
Yeah.
University. This is somebody who was, folks are supposed to
It's
look up to,
grotesque. Yeah.
and this is the person. This is a guy who's been revealed as a complete creep. And to your point, like, I mean,
Yeah.
what is he? What is his accountability mechanism going to be, right? I mean, he's going to
Yeah.
probably still continue to teach at Harvard, hopefully not,
Blech.
and go on and write a couple of books.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, it also makes me think of all of the women who have been sounding the alarm about these people for so long, right?
Yeah,
Many of these men have been open secrets. And it also makes me think of how quickly the Me Too movement faced so much backlash from exactly these types of
right.
people, right? Who were working so thoroughly to crush that as, a cancel
Yeah,
movement or, like not all men. I mean, it's the exact same players. And just if there was ever a lesson of like trust women,
Yeah, I
this is
mean,
it.
well, that and then I mean the whole vibe of I think even at the time, folks were being like, these folks do doth protest too much to quote Shakespeare, right? Where it's
Yes.
like you're going awfully hard on this. Like, I mean, what do you have to hide? And for some of these folks, well, we know now.
Yes. Yes. And then I think like the cherry on top is Epstein being like, "Oh yeah, Trump, that guy's disgusting.
Yeah.
Like he's a super creep." And it's like, wow.
You talk about taking one to know one. I mean, my God.
Yeah. Even among these guys, Trump is totally creepy. Like, ugh.
How lucky for us he
Um,
runs the country. My God.
yes.
Jeez. Oh,
Um,
my Lord.
I mean, I think, Marcus, if there's one thing that the news this week, and I mean every week basically, but especially this week, is showing us, it's that you really can't outrun your history. Um, and I think that's why I'm so excited for us to be joined by our guest today, who is historian Peniel Joseph. His work invites us to take a step back from the constant horrors of the news cycle and understand some of the histories that shape this current moment. And I think the Epstein files are just such an incredible example of like, pay attention to your history,
Mm,
right? Like,
yes.
we've all known this. History repeats itself. We've all known this history for a long time, and it's finally seeing the light of day. And I hope there are consequences coming.
I do as well. I do as well.
Yeah.
We shall see. I am cautiously optimistic. That's the close to hope. That's the closest to hopeful that I get these days. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Fair. Well, today our guest, Peniel Joseph, is going to be taking us back to a different era, but one that has, I think, a lot of parallels to our own. So Peniel's work focuses on the civil rights era. And in the conversation that we're airing today, he talks with us specifically about his newest book, Freedom Season, which focuses on the extraordinary change and extraordinary retaliatory violence of the year 1963. And I think, at least for me, Marcus, I really wanted to bring him on to be in conversation with us because there's so much in his work that evokes the resonance of history in many of the conversations that we're having today. And there's so much about the time period that he's writing about that has connections to the moment we're in, and holds so many lessons for the time that we're in.
Absolutely. And I must say that this is a interview that I wasn't able to join just because of some scheduling conflicts, and I had so much FOMO. This is such a great,
I know
great
we were really
conversation,
missing you.
but I will never miss again.
Hopefully not our last with
Not
Peniel.
at all. Not at all.
Yeah. Peniel Joseph is the Barbara Jordan Chair in Ethics and Political Values, the founding director of the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy, and distinguished service leadership and professor of history at the University of Texas at Austin. He's an internationally recognized scholar, author, speaker, and editor of 7 award-winning books, most recently Freedom Season: How 1963 Transformed America's Civil Rights Revolution, which just won him the 2025 Texas Writer Award. He is also the author of the acclaimed book, The Sword and the Shield: The Revolutionary Lives of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., which served as the inspiration for the award-winning 8-part National Geographic series, MLK/X. Joseph frequently comments on race, civil rights, and democracy in many popular outlets, including CNN, PBS NewsHour, the New York Times, and others, on issues related to American history and democracy. Well, Peniel, it's so exciting to talk to you about this book. I feel like you've spent the last couple of months just going around the country and like collecting book awards like they're Pokemon cards. So we appreciate you taking a little time to chat with us.
Oh, thank you. No, it's great to be here, Nora. Thank you for having me.
So your book Freedom Season points to 1963 as an absolutely pivotal watershed year for civil rights in the US. You point to it as being 100 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation and seeing extraordinary steps forward for civil rights alongside extraordinary anti-Black violence and right-wing rhetoric. Why did it feel really important for you to tell the story of 1963 for today's readers at this moment in time?
Well, Nora, I had been working on this book for years. It turns out, right? And so the
Books
time
have a way of doing that.
Yeah, so the timing has been auspicious in the sense that I had been working on the book for years, and I actually put this book down to do a book called The Third Reconstruction,
Mhm.
which really looked at uh, Black Lives Matter and going all the way back from the end of the Civil War all the way to the protest of George Floyd and the racial reckoning or so-called reckoning of that time period.
Yeah.
And I went back to this book afterwards, but I've been working on this book for over 10 years. And this book comes out of research that I had done on the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement. And the deeper I did research, did a dual biography of MLK and Malcolm X, a biography of Stokely Carmichael. The deeper I did research, the more I kept uncovering these gems in 1963. And I thought that 63 was a both a pivotal year, but got the Kennedy assassination sort of overwhelms the year. And then it's also a year sometimes people don't give as much attention to because 64 is when you get Freedom Summer and the Civil Rights Act, and 64 is where you get Selma and the Voting Rights Act and Watts. And so it all got me much more interested in 63. Baldwin and The Fire Next Time got me interested. Medgar Evers and Murray Evers got me interested. Gloria Richardson in Cambridge, Maryland, who negotiates with Bobby Kennedy and the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. I was interested in looking at the March on Washington in a different way, right? And so all of it got me interested, and that's how sort of the genesis of this book. And I did an op-ed for the New York Times in 2013 on the 50th
Mm.
anniversary of the Kennedy speech, the civil rights speech from June 11th, and that got me really interested in perhaps doing something on the whole year.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a unique way to tell a story of history, right? To just focus on one year and to really help the reader understand what this single year was like in the life of so many different people. And through that really kind of remarkable narrative construction, I think we're able to see just how many momentous things were happening in a single year, forming, as you put it, these concentric circles of change, right? So you describe this as a hinge year in which the nation's kind of moral center was contested. Looking at where we are in 2025, and I realize historians hate these like, "Oh, well, what about today?" questions, but I'm gonna do it to you. Do you see us living through another hinge year in this moment, or maybe a hinge decade for democracy and racial justice?
Well, absolutely. I think that there are very, very many similarities, except for the administration that's there, right? So the Kennedy administration was a pro-democracy administration that people were very critical of, that had its own flaws and weaknesses, but it absolutely was a pro-democracy administration, and that's the way in which civil rights advocates were able to get
Yeah.
some leverage and some pressure. But other than that, the right wing onslaught was there in 63. It certainly turned back, but it was there and it's going to build and build up until this moment. So one of the things 63 gives you with the John Bircherites, with William F. Buckley, with the Kennedy assassination and um, the right wing onslaught even before the Kennedy assassination, Young Americans for Freedom, conspiracy theories about Kennedy uh, getting 16,000 troops from the African Congo to invade Texas. This is way before QAnon, but it shows you the what was building and bubbling in the United States in 1963. And so I think that has taken over the entire federal government apparatus. And certainly it's taken over certain state governments like Texas, Florida,
Mhm.
and other places. The civil rights activity is still there too. So
Mhm.
sometimes we think to ourselves, we're not living in a momentous era when it comes to civil rights. But when you think about, there are poor people's campaigns, there's the No Kings rallies, um, the anti-gun violence, certainly the movement for Black Lives, but LGBTQIA plus queer movements. There are movements in the making as well as they were in 63. And there's also the huge debates over what dignity and citizenship and freedom and democracy look like. And it's global in scope because 63 was global in scope because of
Yes.
African and Asian and other decolonization movements. And you can see that with what's going on in Ghana at the same time as the March on Washington. Malcolm X and what he's doing against police brutality. So it's a very interesting moment, and I do think that 2025 is a huge uh, moment. And I like what you said about as a decade because I do think that um, this is a decade as tumultuous as the 1960s. It's just that I think one of the things we can see 62 years later, Nora, is that um, capitalism and the
Hmm.
oligarchs have much more power and control over the country now than they did in 1963. So 1963 is important. Part of the reason why it's such a successful year, even with the tragedies and assassinations, is that it's only 18 years into the post-World War II American order that now we know through the hindsight of history is globally going to last for 80 years. And certainly it's over now when we think
Yeah.
about NATO and Trump. And in terms of the racial justice period, it's going to last for 50 years from 63 to 2013. And it ends with Shelby v. Holder and the sort of basically the diminishing of the Voting Rights Act, right? Because that diminishing of the Voting Rights Act set up the authoritarianism that we see now. So by diminishing the Voting Rights Act and saying that policy was not sacrosanct, that sets up ICE raids.
Yeah.
That sets up deportation of American citizens, that sets up regimes of terror, and it sets up assaults on women's reproductive rights. It sets up assaults on trans people and queer people. That's what people have to always understand. And I think you see it in 63. Black people are the canary in the coal mine. So when you see more rights and equity and equality for Black people, that's going to help people who are poor, who are elderly, who are immigrants.
Yeah.
There's a cascading effect. But when you assault something like the Voting Rights Act, which is really for everybody, but certainly is coming out of a movement for Black dignity and citizenship, other people are going to be hurt by that. And that even continues today with the government shutdown and 42 million people not receiving SNAP benefits, millions of federal workers out of work. So it's all connected.
Hmm. Another piece that feels really connected between 1963 and now, as I was reading the book, is it feels like 1963 is just this year of remarkable tension over narrative, over what sorts of stories we're going to tell about ourselves as a country, not just about Black Americans, but about all Americans. And I think that's really what you're trying to kind of point out that Baldwin is doing in particular, is thinking about what is the moral story of America. And so many of the figures in this book are just relentlessly focused on how this narrative can be changed, right? What are the effective ways that you saw them doing that, that you think we could adopt or integrate into our work now?
Well, when we think about the the 63 as a high point of the heroic period of the civil rights movement, narrative is huge here. And I think Baldwin, King, all these people are setting up their own narratives. Lorraine Hansberry, there are global Black feminist narratives that are
Mhm.
happening at this point. There are local grassroots narratives. I think what's interesting about Baldwin and King and then Malcolm has a anti-imperialist narrative that
Yes.
he's setting up, and it's interesting to see him in 63 because the way in which the popular memory they really just remember these radicals as lunatics. That's how people are remember them, right? And so to see him as somebody who's calm and steady and criticizing police brutality, doing these things, it lends the year a much different flavor. What's interesting about King and James Baldwin, though, is that they sow this movement for Black dignity and citizenship into a wider American narrative, right? So they're interested and they do it in different ways. King, when you think about Letter from Birmingham Jail and the March on Washington, he has a critique of white liberalism, but still is sowing the movement into the patriotic repository of 1776. And that's what
Right.
he does when you look at Letter from Birmingham Jail, where he says one day the young people being arrested in Birmingham are going to remember as heroes for bringing the nation back to those great wells of democracy that were dug deep by the founding fathers. So
Hmm.
King is very, very interesting in that sense. And he in the March on Washington, I Have a Dream speech, he talks about slavery. He talks about the Civil War and Reconstruction, but then he talks about a way that there can be reunion of the sons and daughters of those who were enslaved, breaking bread at a table of brotherhood with the sons and daughters of those who were slave owners.
Hmm.
And, I think Baldwin does everybody one better and more radical and
Yeah.
revolutionary. And I'm working on a book on Baldwin now,
Yeah.
and Baldwin's civil rights journey, because I think what Baldwin does is Baldwin proposes, and he wouldn't say this. I'm saying this as a scholar and stuff. He would push back against me. He proposes through narrative and through these series of essays that he writes, especially after visiting the South in 1957, really a theory of American history and multiracial democracy that hinges on confronting the past in order to come up with a new social compact where we believe in the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution for all people, and we become moral and political and social exemplars who can actually carry on that work. And
Hmm.
that's why he talks about achieving our country and he uses the term we in his essays, right?
Yeah.
And so Baldwin, famously says that, uh, he loves America, and that's why he insists on the right to criticize America because he loves America. And
Yeah.
he famously says that he doesn't want to see the nation tumble and the nation be destroyed because there's too much beauty in the nation, right? And so Baldwin is doing something very, very interesting. And in Freedom Season, I track him throughout 63 in ways that I think are revelatory for people who didn't live through that time and weren't following him.
Yeah.
So we can see the kind of challenges he lays down for everybody across the ideological political spectrum. Because a lot of times black radicals don't think he's radical enough because they're misreading and misunderstanding Bolton, right?
Hmm. And
Uh,
his audience, right?
and
And the
and
people
and
he's speaking to.
and the people he's speaking to,
Yeah.
and then sometimes white Marxists and left folks think that Baldwin is just preaching a gospel of love, which is it's not that simple. It's
Yeah.
not that simple, because he's really talking about power, and
Right.
he's talking about um, multiracial democracy. He's talking about justice, but he's also talking about what he calls the private self, which is what is inside all of us that sees the necessity to scapegoat other people,
Yeah.
right? And trying to grapple with that. So he becomes very, very interesting. But yes, narrative is a huge part of this. And we see how Baldwin changes after the March on Washington because of the six children who are killed September 15th, 1963 in Birmingham.
Yeah. I wanted to return back to the theme of really reactionary violent politics that also runs throughout this book. I mean, as reading these histories, it's almost impossible not to also think about the extreme reactionary politics that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah.
You mentioned your previous book, The Third Reconstruction, which really argued that the rise of Black Lives Matter movements represented a third Reconstruction period in the United States.
Yeah.
It's been such a tremendous period of resistance and retrenchment.
Yes.
And many activists today, I think, feel like we're reliving old battles under new names, right? Whether it's voter suppression or book bans or attacks on diversity programs. What lessons from how people responded to this reactionary politics in 1963 might help us to sort of sustain momentum in this moment without succumbing to despair or cynicism? Or should we succumb?
No, we should never succumb to despair or cynicism. I think we see there was real solidarity and coalition politics in 1963.
Mm,
So we're thinking about, and I think we've seen this in New York City with Mamdani. We're thinking about labor. We're thinking about people of color. We're thinking about poor people. We're thinking about people who are incarcerated. We're thinking about people who are mothers and take care of children, single mothers. We're thinking about any single parents. So we're thinking about queer folks. And we're just thinking about people across ideological, religious, ethnic lines getting together. So I think with Mamdani, he was able to do it vis-a-vis affordability. I think with the civil rights movement, they were able to do it. And this is where King and Malcolm become very interesting, and Baldwin too, and people like Gloria Richardson, Lorraine Hansberry, they did it along the axis of dignity and citizenship. And I think we can do that as well now. So
Yes.
dignity is really important because the argument that people like Malcolm X and Baldwin make, even more than King, because King makes a different argument about citizenship, is that Black people and really all people have God-given dignity. And
Hmm.
that becomes a very, very crucial argument because by saying that, what they then make the next part of the argument is that citizenship is merely the external recognition of human dignity.
Hmm.
And so, and this is something that a lot of times white liberals and black liberals, people who are just liberals, don't understand. So if dignity is the key, then you understand how abhorrent ICE raids are, and you
Yeah.
understand how abhorrent it is to mistreat people because they don't have a passport, they don't have papers, right?
Right.
And because of birthright citizenship, which goes back to the Civil War and Reconstruction, if not for the 14th Amendment, we would all need papers, right?
Right.
And so the interesting thing about 63 is that we make a connection between dignity and citizenship that for a time really crest over the next 5 years, where we see that legislation, but we see campaigns, including by 1968, the Poor People's Campaign for King,
Yeah.
that become these massive movements for dignity and citizenship. Including student activists, prisoner rights movements, anti-poverty movements. All these things are connected to dignity and citizenship. And again, in our own time, like I said, I think the in addition to the movement for Black Lives, which had less of an electoral bent, the movement that you've seen with Zoran Mamdani in New York City to become the first mayor since John Lindsay in 1969, when Lindsay was running for a second term to get over 1 million votes, and really be able to defeat a machine that was authoritarian, proto-fascist, absolutely white supremacist and racist. Vulture capitalists, gangster capitalists,
Yep.
to be able to defeat that machine, that was done through coalition. And that's why in his victory speech, he talked about people who were from Yemen and
Hmm.
and Senegal and the whole sort of international cosmopolitan transnational coalition that he set up and helped organize in New York, right? And
Yeah.
I think the civil rights movement is the movement that does that first, right? The civil rights movement. And so when you think about King, and you can see it in the March on Washington, um, um, I think that chapter might be called "The Sight of the Horizon." But the March on Washington chapter, you see jazz musicians, you see suburban housewives, you see the Shriners and labor movement,
Hmm.
SEIU 1199, religious movements. You see Jewish and Christian and Muslim and other groups coming together. And so part of what we need, and when you think about the civil rights movement, is the coalitions of philanthropic, religious, um, educational, labor, uh, feminist movements, queer, coming together and really coming together in a selfless way, because all those movements, because we're a pluralistic society at best, have their 50 points that they'd like change for
Yeah.
for their own group. So it's finding common ground and common solidarity and saying this comes first.
Yeah.
Like we're going to agree on these three things, right? And so when you think about Mandani, he runs just on three things. It's overall affordability, but it's rent stabilization, it's fast and free buses,
Transportation.
and it's universal childcare.
Yep.
So those are three things, and that's one of the lessons of the civil rights movement that Mamdani, and I think people who want justice now have to remember, is that you can write a position paper where, Nora, there's going to be 360 things you want changed. But when you think about politics, people can't remember more than three
Yeah.
because they have so much going on in their lives. So when somebody says, okay, it's going to be childcare, uh, fast and free buses, uh, uh, and rent stabilization, rent freezes, people say, okay, I'm with you.
Yeah.
That's it. And they also say, please, no more. I don't want to
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah.
All they can remember is those three things. So he got that. And for the civil rights movement, it was, ending racial segregation, it was voting rights, and it was being treated with human dignity.
Yeah.
Those were the things.
I'm so glad you were bringing up this point about dignity and the the economic and political populism of these coalitions, because it's a topic we were actually just talking about last week with political organizer Charles Douglas, who was really involved in the Mamdani campaigns as well as a number of others, and he was kind of saying we need to we need to have a new big tent politics, right? That really reinvents who progressive politics is for and brings in all of these coalitions under a banner of economic dignity. And I think one of the things that people forget about the period you're writing about is that economic dignity was equally as important, I think, in many ways, as the political dignity that people were advocating for. Um,
Absolutely.
One of the other things I loved about this book, though, is that you have so many characters in it and they don't always agree, right? Like
No. Yeah.
famously, MLK and like Malcolm X did not agree. But
Right.
there's so many other people, and they all have these vibrant, different visions of what they want. But what you're really tracking is how they all get onto the same page, right? And it's such an incredible story of coalition building over a very concrete period of time. So I love that part of it, and I think it's like an instruction manual for us right now.
Yes, and I think the March on Washington becomes really key here because to build coalitions, you also want to have impact. And what you start to see as the movement starts cresting, the Kennedys don't want the March on Washington,
Mhm.
right? But it's going to happen anyway because it's become a movement, and that's what you
Yeah.
saw with what happened in the '60s. But we've just saw it recently in New York City. So you do have to build coalitions, and you have to think about coalitions in ways that are going to produce economic and political justice. So it's a march on Washington for jobs and freedom. We live in a capitalist society. We can have a better uh, social democracy and social democratic kind of capitalism with elections, but that's going to take having a ceiling and a floor
Yeah.
on economic success because the ceiling is saying that you can't make trillions at the expense of the whole world. And the floor is saying that, you're not going to be unhoused. The four things people need are housing, healthcare, education, and they need transportation. Those are the four things. And those should all be universal alongside of a universal basic income.
Mm.
So if you had a universal basic income, but you allowed people to be in settings where they had free education, they had free healthcare, and they had free transportation, as well as they were not going to be unhoused ever, you're much better on an arc to have a justice politics nationally.
Yeah. Well, I want to return to this point that you have touched upon a couple times about the sort of oligarchic politics that we are in at the moment. Um, and there's another element of that that I was thinking about a lot as I read the book. So also, I went back and rewatched I Am Not Your Negro in preparation for
Yeah,
our conversation
yeah.
because I was thinking so much about Baldwin. And there's this thing that Baldwin says in the film, something along the lines of people forget how young everybody was. He mentions how MLK, Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers all died before they were 40.
Yeah.
Lorraine Hansberry died at 34. In 1963, Bobby Kennedy was 38, I think.
Yeah. Mhm.
Jacqueline Kennedy was 34.
Yeah.
Um, I couldn't help but think while I was reading this about how different our political dynasties feel today. Um, Not just peppered with wealth, but with aging politicians who refuse to see their power. Um, do you think there's an element of this story that is about youth and about the generational politics of that very broad coalition?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think it is about youth, although there were people who were middle-aged and who were older who were part of that movement. But it's certainly a contrast with our time in the sense of we've got a gerontocracy where
Mm,
the political class, even the class of, you think about Bob Iger at Disney, and you think about people who are, sort of wealthy and they're 75, they're 80, and because of healthcare for the rich and elites, they've been able to live a lot longer. And you saw it with Joe Biden's disastrous attempt to run for a second term at age 79. There's something very, very negative about that. Right now, the political leaders should be Generation X and lower. Right. So people who are basically in their late 40s and early 50s and younger should have next. But we have a group of people, we think about Nancy Pelosi in the House of Representatives. You think about Democrats and Republicans. The president himself is
yeah.
the right now on track to be the oldest president ever, right? Because he was a little younger than Biden. So no, this is very, very negative. And there was a youth movement, and we think about the race against the Soviet Union after Sputnik. There was an accent on youth and young people, and these were groups of people who had been born in the 1920s and 1930s who were trying to make these epical changes.
Um, I I wanted to also ask you about one other theme that runs throughout the book is about the sort of duality of moral courage and moral exhaustion. Um, you really see people like Baldwin talking about that
Hmm.
quite explicitly, and really thinking about how they sustain themselves in the face of relentless violence and grief. And I'm wondering if you think there are lessons here that would hold for today's organizers and even media or academics who are under fire about what endurance looks like in these times.
Yeah, I mean, I think Baldwin's very interesting because he is in the middle of the fray, but he always talks about having to go back to Europe,
Mhm.
to Istanbul, to other places. He calls himself a transatlantic commuter to take care of himself and to just as a matter of survival, right?
Yeah.
So I do think that it's become much more difficult for our generation and generations younger than us because of the internet, because of social media, because of the cell phone to take a break from things, right? And so, I think this is a really, really difficult, exhausting time. But I think there are lessons there to take care of yourself. I mean, Dr. King famously would vacation in Jamaica and
Mhm.
the Bahamas and stuff and take some time off with Coretta, with his wife. And so Malcolm X sort of infamously never takes a vacation, but he gets to take one in 1964 after the break with the nation and his friendship with Cassius Clay on his way to becoming Muhammad Ali. And so I do think that you know people are very much at risk for burnout and should be trying to take care of themselves. And that moral exhaustion is very important too, because I think over time, people like Baldwin and all the figures I look at, Hansberry, Richardson, people do get exhausted. People do
Mhm.
get exhausted, and people do get, if not cynical, they lose some kind of hope because the world that they thought was in reach is not, right.
Mhm.
But now that we've seen what the last 10, 15 years have brought, we can see that the world that they produce in certain ways was better than they thought. You know, I think another world is possible, and we should build an even better world. But from our vantage point, that 63 to 2013 period becomes a high point um, with a different kind of rhetoric, different expectations, and a different kind of moral compass, despite its huge flaws and shortcomings, than what we're witnessing right now.
Yes. Yeah. To that point about world building, um, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about Baldwin and your future project, because I got to hear a little about it in New York when we met a couple of months ago, and it sounds amazing. What you're saying now reminds me of something you write in the book about Baldwin, that his, and I'm quoting you, his words at times miraculously helped to make the America of his literary imaginings into a tangible possibility. Baldwin did not just dream of building a new world, he set out to create one. Do you want to tell us a little bit about why Baldwin is such a pivotal figure in your work at this moment in time, and what kind of what you think he'll communicate to Americans now?
Yeah, so I think James Baldwin is really one of the most important figures of the 20th century, and not just as a writer. So I'm interested in Baldwin, the public intellectual, Baldwin the activist, Baldwin this the speech maker and the speaker, um, and Baldwin being interviewed, and what does that discourse do to the shape of the country? Because I think for a time, and I'm thinking late 50s, early 60s, he's being read by millions of people,
Mm-hmm.
and he's really shaping the discourse on dignity and freedom and citizenship and democracy. And I think, really at his best, Baldwin calls us for an as he calls us towards an aspirational multiracial America, that is a beacon of hope globally, but that is also walking the talk and
Mm-hmm.
has less inconsistencies and less hypocrisies than the America of his own time, right? Because it's never going to be perfect, and he realizes that. But Baldwin, and you think about essays like Fifth Avenue, Uptown, and the essay on Dr. King, The Dangerous Road Before Martin Luther King Jr., and They Can't Turn Back. I mean, he's writing in Esquire, Mademoiselle, New York Times. What he's doing is multiple things at once. On one level, he's writing a theory of history, uh,
Mm-hmm.
that pushes back against American exceptionalism, that pushes back against William Faulkner and Ernest Hemingway, and sort of wants to talk about the reality amidst this very American unreality of myth making and John Ford and the slaughtering of Native Americans. And he's telling people that, this is going to end very badly. Like the purpose of life is not to become successful and get a new Cadillac. He's saying that. He's saying, hey, I've tried that and it doesn't work. So for Baldwin, he's saying we've got to connect our private selves with our public lives. And the private self is the self that doesn't want to talk about racial slavery, that doesn't want to talk about uh, the sexual assault against Black women historically, that doesn't want to talk about the way in which post-war America, during the Kennedy administration and the Eisenhower administration, the jet age is built on all this carnage
Mm-hmm.
and all this violence, right? And then myths that rationalize and exalt the carnage at the expense of a truth and reality that continues to gnaw at everyone, not just Black people. So that's his point. That's his point. And so sometimes people think that Baldwin is not interested in policy, and he's actually very interested in that. But he says the before you can get to that, you have to acknowledge the reality, which is why his theory of American history pushes back against the lies in American history books that politicians articulate, that people try to imbibe, and that really is reflected in the grotesque nature of American religious and political and educational institutions that keep trying to uphold that lie, both in Baldwin's time, but obviously, especially our own, right? The Stop Woke
Exactly.
Acts, Governor Rick DeSantis, what's happening in Texas. So the lies that Baldwin says are real, and they are what the country worships. And so my new project is really looking at Baldwin's civil rights years, and the fact that I don't think that and there's been some, especially there's a recent great biography by Nicholas Boggs on Baldwin, but I think when you do a biography, because you have to do the whole picture,
Yeah.
you can't I think, zero in on some essential parts. And so I'm really looking at the years from 1957 to around 1963, and the years where Baldwin is visiting the South. He's making friends with his friendships with Lorraine Hansberry, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr. deepen, but also his friendships with students who are connected to Congress of Racial Equality Core and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee SNCC, because he's visiting them and he's writing reportage about this. And I'm just interested in how that experience changes him and also changes the discourse. And certainly during the second half of his career, in certain ways, he's constantly relitigating that experience in novels and essays and interviews,
Hmm.
and the same sort of establishment that had praised him all the way up until the fire next time really starts to say that because of his politics, his work has suffered, right?
Mm.
So it's a very interesting catch-22. And the documentary that you referenced, Raoul Peck's really brilliant documentary, I'm Not Your Negro, from 2016 or so, that was part of a renaissance of Baldwin that really begins in the 1980s and 90s after his death. There's a James Baldwin Collective. Dwight McBride, who's a scholar, a literary scholar at University of Washington, St. Louis, has a brilliant anthology called James Baldwin Now from 1999. And there's a James Baldwin Review, an open source uh, uh, journal that publishes tremendous work on James Baldwin.
Hmm.
And then certainly because of the movement for Black Lives and George Floyd, Baldwin has achieved a tremendous kind of prominence among Generation Zs and younger, because so much of what he's saying connects with the times we live in now.
For sure.
Yep.
One last question. I think work like your own is doing a lot to protect civil rights history from the nostalgia industry. I always kind of laugh when people cite that MLK quote about like the arc of the universe bends towards justice, and I'm like,
Yeah.
it's not a physics principle. Like you have to work at it. It's not going to get there on its own.
Yeah.
Um, but how do you think about your work within the larger context of how Black American history has been treated by the media, by popular culture, um, and really intentionally think about holding it up to the truth of history and also keeping it from becoming sanitized or mythologized or overwritten by nostalgia?
Well, no, I think that work is I think my work is contributing to that. I think there's great scholarship on the civil rights movement in general. There's a new book by Brandon Terry at Harvard called Shattered Dreams, Infinite Hope, which looks at the tragic narrative of the civil rights movement and pushes back against a romantic narrative that says, this all worked, it was all successful. Because if that was true, how do we get to this point?
Yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
so I do think that we have to tell that story and tell it straight. But at the same time, I also think simultaneously, and I think Baldwin's a great example of this, Nora, is that when you tell that story straight, it becomes this multiracial story, and you do find different groups who we think of as being antagonistic with one another in solidarity with one another, right?
Hmm.
So that's at least at times, right? At least so it doesn't become a romantic narrative and mythologize, but it's also not just a narrative of suffering and a narrative of faltering. And that's why I thought in Freedom Season I try to show those arcs
Yeah.
in terms of the winter, spring, summer, fall, summer and autumn, because there are high points. There are times where people feel like, hey, this is working. We're going to change everything, and things are changing, right? And
Hmm.
and um, if things hadn't changed after 63, you really wouldn't have gotten a very simple example is Barack and Michelle Obama. But even when you think about Hillary Clinton,
Hmm.
when you think about um, um, the efforts that women, both women of color but also white women, have made in higher ed and corporate America and just all throughout the world, right? Um, Being head of the Carnegie, right? That wouldn't have happened in
Yeah.
1963. So we have to understand that change happened. Alongside of that positive change becomes mass incarceration. Alongside of that positive change are these, the impoverishment of different groups, right? So it's one thing. As a critical thinker, I think it becomes hard to grab a hold and understand these juxtapositions, and don't think of them as just Nora aberrations. That
Hmm.
so when things don't work out, that's just an aberration and the country is basically good. No,
Right.
these are juxtapositions, and it's really complicated because, if anything, I think what's so interesting in our time is that the current president and the reactionary, authoritarian, very racist, deeply misogynistic, xenophobic policies that are being articulated, they're directed not just at the masses, but directed at groups of people who gained access because of the racial justice, economic justice consensus
Hmm.
of the post World War II era. So
Yeah.
by the time you're saying, let's fire the professors, let's ban Black History Month and Queer History Month and Latino, that's what's going on now. And so that shows, I think, people who've who've disputed that anything changed after the 1960s. It just shows you how much actually did change.
Yes. Yeah. And also you can't outrun history.
Yes,
Right.
it shows you that too, which is a sobering lesson. You can't
Yeah.
outrun history. Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us. The book is Freedom Season. It's incredible. We'll post a link to it on the show notes. Peniel, it was great to chat with you.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Now, Nora, I have to say, like, Vanille is very much, I would say, our, and I know, comparisons, the thief of joy, yada yada yada, but I have to say, Vanille is very much, I think, our modern day Howard Zinn, just in the sense of he's a
Yes.
historian who isn't trying to sanitize the past in order to make it, more palatable for folks. Like, I mean, he just brings the real, and I am just so grateful for your conversation today.
Yeah, it was really wonderful to have him. And as someone who probably doesn't read enough history,
D-
especially
Does
American
anyone? Does
history,
anyone, Nora?
um, well, I think it's definitely like an area where I do not have a lot of expertise. It was really lovely to revisit this period in some depth, and just Peniel's level of storytelling just really brings these characters alive and reminds us of how recent this history is. I mean,
Yes.
we get those reminders all the time, but someone was just writing this week that Ruby Bridges is still only in, I think, her 70s,
Right.
and um, so many of these histories are so recent, and I think Peniel's work really brings them um, into close correspondence with our current time.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, I think often we forget how long, we've been a true democracy, meaning like, and I don't even know if we're a true democracy now, quite frankly, but we've been we forget how short it's been, quite frankly, of like the democracy that resembles what we have right now, right? I mean, if you want to, trace it back to the sort of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, it's nearly less than a generation. And so
Right.
I think in many ways what Peniel had, what I took from this is like how fragile, these
Yeah.
rights and so forth that we have right now. And that means like we have to continue to fight for them and not allow regression. And where we can, and where we can't make progress, we have to defend. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, this is definitely going to be a conversation that I listen to again over the holiday break that we're taking here. Um,
Yes.
that being said, why don't we go ahead and sprinkle a little joy for folks, as we won't be here, quote unquote, next week because we'll be sharing time with family and friends.
Yes, and I think we all need a little bit more joy going into the holiday season. Do you want to go first, Marcus?
Yeah. So I guess at the risk of sounding like some fifth grader about expressing gratitude to everybody they they love and like. You know, 3 years ago I wrote a piece. It was about my younger brother, to Marcus Coleman, who he tragically died in a carbon monoxide accident. And
Mm.
I wrote a piece that we're actually going to share for next week's episode. Um, about making sure that you tell your imperfect relative or somebody you're estranged with, how you feel about them. Like, you want to try to reach out to them even though you've maybe had some rough patches. And I will say this, like, from that I've kind of learned to try to have a gratitude practice of uh, now that this doesn't have to be people who you're estranged from, or who you have you take issue with or have offended you or whatever, and you're trying to reconcile with. But these are just folks who in your everyday who I think you take for granted, right? That whether it's a
Mm.
friend or a mentor or a teacher or a coworker or your producer at in the meanwhile, there's just always an ample opportunity to tell them how much they mean to you, how much you appreciate
Yeah.
them, how much you care for them. And I think so often it's just so much easier with the frenzy of life to forget to do that. And so I think, my joy, and I know I expressed this last week with 25th episode is, for you, Nora, and Jessica, for continuing to be on this ride. And then also just to continue to have this practice of gratitude of, seeing sort of the abundance of people who I have in my life and in my community who really continue to elevate and uplift me at times when you're at your lowest. And I'm just glad, I guess, to be able to recognize that, and recognize how much even even though these times are not necessarily the lightest, shall we say. It just feels so great to have so many people in my life um who are nurturing. And you hope
Mm.
at the end of the day that you can give more. At least I do. I hope that I can give more to those people than I take from them. So yeah.
You give a lot, Marcus, and I'm especially appreciative that you're willing to share the story about your brother with our listeners as well. It's a really gorgeous reminder of the value of family, even when those bonds are
Yeah.
imperfect, and how much family means to us. So
Yeah.
thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Well, um, my eight ounces this week is also about family. I I don't know if we've discussed this actually, but my grandfather, my dad's father, actually was a journalist during the civil rights era, and actually worked for the New York Times during that time. And um, in sort of doing research for my conversation with Peniel, I kind of was interested to go back and see what he was writing at the time in 1963. Um, and he actually covered the March on Washington for the New York Times. And so I got to
Oh
kind of,
wow.
I knew that as a kid,
Yeah.
but like as a kid, you don't really take this stuff seriously. And
Right.
he, um, he kind of died before I really reached a point in life where I could kind of appreciate who he was. He was just my grandpa. Um, but so I went back and read his coverage of the March on Washington this past week, and it was just really magical to connect with his words and be able to connect with him across that boundary of history and difference. And yeah, I think like you, just feeling a lot of gratitude for our family members, even those who are lost to time or history.
Yeah.
So,
That was beautiful.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Nora. Yeah. Now you got me. Before I start to get weepy eyed, why don't we do this sign off here?
I know, I know. We promise not to be this touchy-feely all
No,
the
hey,
time.
it is the
It's
season
good.
for it, my friend. It is the season for it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, well, folks, I thought it would be fun to sign off this week with an apt little quote from none other than Alexis de Tocqueville.
Mm.
Uh, And he writes that one can perish in politics from too much memory. And to that, I say, may it be so.
Oh, yes.
So let's all keep on remembering and holding the powerful accountable to history.
Alexis is one of my favorite French people, so
Mine
very
too.
apt quote there.
Yeah.
And as always, folks, we are incredibly grateful to our guest, Peniel Joseph, and to our producer, Jessica Partnow. The music you hear on the show is from the one and only Aham Aluo. You can find In the Meanwhile by tuning into KBRU Wednesdays at 5 p.m. or find our full episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky.
If you enjoy the show, please support us by donating or subscribing at inthemeanwhilepodcast.com. New episodes drop every Friday. And until then, we'll see you in the meanwhile.